Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья! Сегодня у меня интересное интервью с очень важным человеком. Он является священником, настоятелем самого большого католического собора в Белфасте, и зовут его отец Юджин.
Hello,
Hello,
Anna.
Father Eugene.
Hello, Anna. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Welcome to St. Patrick's.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for finding time for me, because I always wanted to come here and ask you a few questions, so this is my chance, I suppose.
You're very welcome, and so are all your viewers.
Yeah, thank you very much. What we are going to do, I will ask you 5 questions, only 5 questions, but you can take your time and tell me more about yourself if you like. Are you happy to start?
Absolutely.
Okay, question number 1. Tell me please about your childhood, and at what age did you decide to be a priest?
Well, I had a fairly standard Irish childhood. My father was an engineer, my mother was a secretary, and because of my father's job, we moved around the island of Ireland quite a lot until I was a teenager. Okay. So I went to 4 different primary schools, and then I went to a very famous academic school in Belfast.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to be a doctor, and I intended to be a doctor, but around the age of 15 I had a very powerful religious experience in my heart, in my life, as a result of which I decided that I was going to be a priest. This was made easier for me because in my school many of the teachers were priests, and I found them very kind and very inspirational figures, and so they gave great example to me and to the other students, so it seemed a very natural thing to do at that time.
I see. But if you don't mind me to ask you, it came to you, that feeling, particular feeling, was it a bit like a dream, your night dream, or it was just quite a decision during daytime, or what was it like?
Well,
just tell me more.
That's a very interesting question. It was a decision in the evening, so it was between day and night. It wasn't a dream. It was a moment. The way I describe it is, if you've ever seen a film of a bank vault being opened, the great safe in which all the gold is kept in a bank, but very often those huge doors are opened with a tiny key, and you put the key in and turn it, and click, 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 go all the locks, and the door, this massive, heavy door, gently opens. It was a bit like that. So the moment came one evening around 9 o'clock. I was finishing my work, my homework, and I always said prayers before going to bed, and in the middle of those prayers I had a very strong feeling where I heard a voice inside myself saying, "You will be a priest." So that was it, that was the power. Now after that the thinking came, and I kept that to myself. I didn't tell anyone about it, but I thought about it for a number of years and made some changes to my life. I started going to the Divine Liturgy every day, which was celebrated in my school. I started taking religious things more seriously, but it was my secret. And this grew and grew and grew in my heart. And then after about a year, I went on what we call a retreat, a religious retreat, for people thinking about being priests. I thought I was the only one. But it turned out there were about 80 or 90 other boys in 1983, which is when I went. And many of them were in my school, but we'd never spoken to each other about these things. So I felt a great sense of solidarity. And that continued. Then I went to university in Scotland, the University of St. Andrews, a great Russian saint as well, a great Russian patron, St. Andrew. And after I finished my degree, I decided that this feeling still persisted and I could trust it. And I put myself forward as a candidate for the priesthood, and then trained for 5 or 6 years to be a priest, then became a priest in 1997 here in Belfast.
It's amazing, yeah. But straight away, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask, have you ever experienced days when you would think, that you took wrong decision, or you would hesitate if it was the right decision for you?
Yes,
Yes.
I have, and
Okay,
and I still get to have days like that, because being a priest is an act of faith. It's not an act of certainty, and it doesn't bring certainty. I think part of life is living with uncertainty. I'm sure as a wife and mother, you have days when perhaps you question your decision. I think most parents do, and most priests do. Not profound questioning. It doesn't. There have never been days when I thought I've made a disastrous mistake, but there have been days when I felt like a bad priest, or an inadequate priest, or a bit of a failure, or my life is making no impact. However, there have been days when I felt I've been a reasonably good priest, where my life has made an impact, where I have contributed to other people's happiness. So what I do is, being a priest, and all priests will know this, and all Christians know this, is an act of trust, where you commit yourself to Jesus. And like any journey, or like any relationship, it has ups and it has downs, it has dark periods and bright periods. But part of maturity is to live with light and shadow in one's life. I would have to say, as a 54-year-old man, that I still have a great sense of calm and satisfaction, and a sense that the choice I made for my life, or the choice that was made for me by God, has brought me great satisfaction and deep peace.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Eugene, would you mind me to ask you to describe a typical week of your life as a Catholic priest in Belfast?
Well, one of the extraordinary things about being a priest is that there is no typical day or typical week. Each day has a core moment, which is when we celebrate Mass, the Divine Liturgy. So we do that every day. And unlike the Russian Orthodox Church, our Mass is quite short, usually 30 minutes.
Okay,
I think in Russia,
hours.
yeah.
Yes.
So it's easier for us. Yeah. So that's one foundation of every day. The second foundation is each priest has to say a number of prayers at different times of the day. We call that the divine office, or the divine duty. So those are the things that happen every day, together with food and sleeping. But let me give you an example of a day last week. Well, I got up early in the morning. I spent time in prayer. I made my breakfast. And then I went to the school. We have a primary school for children between 4 and 11. I spent some time with the children, explaining the faith to them and the gospel. Then later in the morning, I had a funeral of someone who died, a 92-year-old woman. And then I buried that person. Then I had my lunch. And after that, I had to be part of a tribunal for a legal case between a teacher and another teacher in my school, and I was the judge, and I had to listen to all the evidence, and that took 3 hours. It was very complex. Then in the afternoon, after that, I had a meeting to make decisions about coronavirus and Christmas, because coronavirus will have an impact on our Christmas services. And then I said some more prayers, and then I telephoned a number of old people whom I can't visit because of the coronavirus, but I keep contact with them by telephoning them. And then I said my night prayers and went to sleep. So that is a typical day of a priest. The Divine Liturgy, our schools, planning, being involved in things like that. And every day is slightly different and very interesting.
Yes, it is. And the other question, just sort of, is it very important to get up and go to bed for you in certain time?
Yes.
Or you're quite relaxed? Like
no, I operate best when my life has discipline.
I just love everything about discipline. Yeah.
So do I. I find if it's a bit like an athlete or a musician. You need to be disciplined, then you can vary the discipline. But without discipline at the core, I think life becomes very flat and flabby. When I'm on my holidays, I don't want any discipline. But when I'm in the parish, I want to be disciplined. So yes, I get up early. I get up, well, for me early, which is 6 o'clock in the morning. For many people, that is not early. And then I go to bed at 10 o'clock every night. But I also am a priest in the hospital. So if someone is very sick during the night, I have to get up and go to the hospital and visit them. But usually, 10 o'clock, lights out. 6 o'clock, lights on.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, question number 3. Russians who come to visit Belfast, they're always surprised that we have, or Belfast has so many different type of churches representing different forms of Christianity. And so we have not only Catholic religion, we have Baptist church, we have Methodist, Presbyterian, Orthodox service, maybe some others. But my question is, what's your relationship with representatives of other churches?
Well, it varies between places, but I consider ecumenical relationships, as we call them, to be very important. There has been a history in Europe, we know this, since the Reformation, of terrible religious divisions and terrible religious violence, which has resulted in the deaths of millions of people. And so I think it is our duty as Christians, whilst being faithful to what we believe to be true, to be open-hearted to all people. That is the heart of the gospel, I think, and that is the heart of Jesus. And I think it's very important for us Christians to realize that there is more that unites us than divides us, and to walk together as a witness to others. Because if we are fighting amongst ourselves, what sort of a witness is that giving to people who are not Christians? In the Gospels it says, look at these Christians, see how they love each other. I think that has to be true of us. So in Ireland, there has been a very recent history of religious violence, and I think it's very important for us to do all that we can to counteract that and make sure it never breaks out again. So relations with other churches are very important for me. And the Catholic Church had a very important reform movement in the 1960s called the Vatican Council. And the Vatican Council made it a duty on all Christians to reach out to Christians of other, or to all Catholics, to reach out to Christians of other ways and traditions. And so I tried to follow that. And I think the best way of following it is by being a friend, by being kind, by helping. The big questions of differences of belief, I leave those to the Pope and to patriarchs and to metropolitans. For me in Belfast, it's about kindness. For example, we run a special soup kitchen to feed the poor who are on the streets, and we do that in hand in hand with, in conjunction with some of our Protestant friends on this street. That's one example. Another example is this church, St. Patrick's, is famous for art. So we had a joint art exhibition recently with a Protestant church where we had huge photographs in our church of their church, and in their church huge photographs of this church to illustrate differences and similarities. And we had a huge amount of interest in that from all the newspapers and from the BBC, who did a program about it. So those are the ways I think we encounter each other. Kindness, common service of the poor, and finding commonalities between us, in this case art.
Thank you for that. Amazing answer. Yeah, you mentioned darkest days, and it actually brings me straight to my next question, because I know you have been living in Northern Ireland through the darkest years, called the Troubles, when Protestants, Catholics were fighting a lot, killing each other. So my question to you, what do you remember most about those days? And the next probably a question, what have we learned from that?
Well, I remember the Troubles vividly, but I was born in 1966, and the Troubles began in 1969. So my whole life had the Troubles as a background. Now, strangely, it had a number of effects. One of the effects was you ignored it. It was like wallpaper or the weather. You just got on with your life, because life was about family, about playing as a child, about studying in school. We forget that these are the things that dominate children's imaginations: their parents, their friends, their school. The Troubles was in the background. But even in the midst of that, there were moments that stand out as being terrible, where the darkness and violence in the background pierced my life. Let me give you one example. In 1976, which was a famously hot and summer in Europe,
wow.
yes, the
in
summers.
Northern Ireland.
It didn't rain for 4 months, and it was very famous in Northern Ireland, and I think most of Europe. But and we would consider that the best summer of our lives. We all remember the long, hot summer of '76. But there was a terrible episode of violence where 3 children were killed by a terrorist car smashing into them. And that, I still remember that day, and I still remember the television pictures. And as a result of that, a huge movement for peace began called the Peace People, comprised of women. Women here decided to stand up against violence, and hundreds of thousands of people went on peace marches. Now, it didn't make any difference, but I remember that as a child. The other thing I remember, for example, would be a period in our history called the hunger strikes, when many IRA members, that was the Republican terrorist stroke physical force movement, 13 of them starved themselves to death in prisons for political purposes. And that created a tremendous sense of fear as we waited for the next person to die, and then the violent backlash. And then most recently, at the very end of the Troubles, there was the worst atrocity in the Troubles in a town called Omagh in Northern Ireland, where many people were killed as a result of a bomb. So one does remember those. And at school, I was a member of a peace organization, which I felt was very important. So yes, the background was dark, but family life was intense and beautiful despite the background, because I think families always exist, love always exists, friendship exists beyond these things. However, I do believe that the wounds of the Troubles continue in our society, and that it will be the task of my generation and the next generation to do their best to heal those things.
Yeah, it's a very good saying, absolutely. What do you think? Is it any chance that we will get all these terrible days back?
I think that there is always a chance of return to violence. There is a famous phrase about history and the Irish, and it goes like this. It is not that the Irish live in the past lives on in them.
Yes.
I think it's true also for Russians.
Yeah.
A profound sense of holding the past in your heart. Regimes come and go, czars and party leaders and presidents, but we are Russian. We hold our past inside us. I think the same is true in Ireland. And if that is a reality, I think there is always a possibility of return to things that are important to us. And nationality is important to us. Religion is important to us, not so much, but still there. Ethnicity is still important to us.
This is, I always was surprised about.
Ethnicity.
Honestly,
In Ireland, still there is a very, you can tell who comes from an Irish background and who comes from a British background, because the British, their blood is English or Scottish, and they look different. For example, I had an Italian friend who came to visit me in Belfast, and I brought him for a walk in a part of Belfast. And he said, everyone looks different here to where you live. And I said, what is different? He said, they're taller, their skin tone is and they look stronger, and they have blonde hair. And it was very interesting to me because that part of Belfast would be very Protestant, but affluent. And you could see there the ethnic strength. Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that because we are still a melting pot in this country. And wherever there is difference, there can be division. So that's my opinion. However, there is a very powerful political consensus here that we must not return to violence. And I think that that is important. And I think it's important also to remind children of what the Troubles were like. The Troubles ended 25 years ago. So to remember the Troubles, you would have to be 35.
Yeah.
And again, there's a famous phrase in history by a philosopher called George Santayana: whoever forgets his past is condemned to repeat it. So I think we have I know. I think we have to constantly remember our past here so that we don't repeat it, and keep our focus on those things that unite us, not those things that divide us.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
but Belfast is a safe place to visit for all your Russian.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ireland is a beautiful place to visit. I know that you have many videos on your YouTube channel of the beauty of Ireland. And Belfast is an interesting city for quite a number of reasons. It's a small city. It's a very welcoming city. Everyone gets a great welcome here. Yeah. And it's a city which, when it recovers from coronavirus, has many interesting aspects. The history, the film industry, which is here, Game of Thrones, Titanic, and also the clash of two civilizations, the Irish civilization and the British civilization, and also a number of Russian links, which are present in my church.
Oh, that's interesting, because this question is just about your church, because it's the most beautiful cathedral, Catholic cathedral in Belfast, and it's called St. Patrick. And what I know, it was built in late 19th century.
Yes.
But my question, I would place it like this: what would be your 3 favorite things about this cathedral?
Well, one of my favorite things is the statue of St. Patrick, which is just above my head. And it was carved by a man called James Pearce, whose son was Patrick Pearce, who was a famous Irish revolutionary, who was the leader of the army that attempted to overthrow the British and put them out of Ireland in 1916. I believe Patrick Pearce was an inspiration to many Russian revolutionaries. The second thing that I like most in this church, Anna, is our high altar. This is our high altar. It's, by our standards, very beautiful. It was carved by a man called James Pearce, who was an Englishman. And the high altar is the place where Mass is celebrated. In the Russian Orthodox tradition, you would have an iconostasis, a screen of icons, which I think is the most beautiful thing in a Russian Orthodox church. But for us, it's very often the high altar. And it is carved with very many scenes from the Bible. So, for example, there is a statue of Mary. There is a statue of Saint Joseph. Beneath the high altar, there is a statue of Christ taken down from the cross. There are angels. There is a representation of the Old Testament. There are many, many saints carved on it. And usually it's the most beautiful thing in a Catholic church. I think it's very beautiful. It was saved from destruction 25 years ago when we had a terrible fire in this church, which almost destroyed the entire church. But it was saved, which I consider something of a miracle.
Absolutely, yeah.
The other thing I like about it is the fact that Catholics in Belfast were extremely poor when this church was built in 1877. there were 30,000 Catholics here. They were mostly rural Catholics who came in looking for work in factories, very similar to Russia. And they lived in terrible poverty, in squalor and slums, but they loved their religion, which gave them hope. And each of them contributed pennies. But all the pennies contributed were enough to build this church, which for me is a memorial to their generosity. And this is a memorial to their generosity, so that is something that always touches me. The other thing that I find interesting about this high altar is that it was carved by James Pearce, whose son was called Patrick Pearce. And Patrick Pearce is immensely significant in Ireland because he was largely responsible for a revival of nationalism, a revival of the Irish language before the First World War. And on a famous day in Easter 1916, he and an army, which he had founded, a private army, began a rebellion against the British state. And it is from that moment that the island of Ireland, the country of Ireland, dates the beginning of its movement for independence. So Patrick Pearce's father carved this altar, and that's a tremendously strong link for us to the independence of Ireland, which took place in 1922. So I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
This painting in my church is very famous. Prince Charles, the son of Queen Elizabeth of England, came to see it some years ago with his wife, Camilla. He will be the king, she will be the queen. It's a painting of the Madonna, of the Blessed Virgin Mary, sometimes called Theotokos, and it was painted by a very famous painter from 1900 to 1940. He was one of the most famous portrait painters in the world, and his name was Sir John Lavery. He was made a knight by the English king because of his painting during the First World War. But he was from this parish. He was born a very poor man. He was baptized in this church. And in 1918, at the end of the First World War, what is sometimes called by us the Great War, he wanted to make a gift to the church of his baptism. And this was the gift, a huge painting of Mary and St. Bridget and St. Patrick. But what is interesting is that the model for Mary was his wife, Lady Hazel Lavery, who was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world at the time. And the models for the two smaller figures on either side of Mary, St. Patrick and St. Bridget, were their two children, two girls, who became members of the aristocracy. Why is this famous? Why is this painting famous? Well, it's famous because Lady Lavery, who is the model, became also the model for a representation of Ireland, which appeared on every Irish banknote between 1922 and the year 2000. So many people claim that his wife, who is depicted here as the mother of Jesus, is in fact the most famous Irish face ever, the face of a woman seen by the most people. This painting was visited in about 2 or 3 years ago by Prince Charles and his wife, the Duchess Camilla, who is the son of the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, and who will become king. And he wanted to see it because he likes Lavery's paintings, but also Lavery painted an immensely famous picture of Prince Charles's family, his great-great-grandfather and his great-great-grandmother, which you can see in London. But there is also another Russian link, which is this, that Sir John Lavery had a friendship with the famous ballerina Anna Pavlova, and he painted Anna Pavlova both dancing and as the dying swan in Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. And so he's very famous, and we're very proud to have this painting here in St. Patrick's.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story. Thank you for that. I know also that the Catholic Church faces quite many challenges at the moment.
Yes.
What you think would be the biggest? And are you optimistic about all the challenges?
I think there are many challenges. I think that the biggest challenge is to present the gospel of Jesus in a way that appeals to modern people, because the challenges for us normal people in today's world are materialism, wealth, the reduction of our horizons towards material things, houses, holidays, food, whatever. And I think it is the task of Christians always to keep our eyes on the spiritual as the real world, and remember that we have a task here in this world, which is to spread love, to bring the message of Jesus, to serve the poor and make the world a better place. But never forget that we're made for a better world, a different world. We Catholics sometimes call that world heaven, and that is the world where the Lord is, where the saints are. And the task of the Church is never to fail to remind people of that and inspire people towards that. So I think that is the first task, and it is the task for all Christians of every part of the Christian family. For the Catholic Church in particular, one of our huge challenges in the last 30 years has been accepting that there is a hidden and dark history beneath the history of the Catholic Church, which has been around the terrible abuse of children. And we have to accept that, which we are doing, and ensure that we do all we can to make sure that never happens again. Because if we preach love and justice for all, we cannot do that effectively if we have a history which we deny, a history where we have allowed terrible things to happen. So I think in the short term, that is the task of the Church, one of the tasks for the next 50 years, to create a church or an environment in which vulnerable people are always safe and always protected.
Yeah, this is amazing saying, and I'm sure you're looking for donations for help, like any other church.
Of course.
If you want to say something, it's probably
well, I'll say that now. Our church is almost 150 years old. As I said, it is a memorial to the pennies of the poor of Belfast, the industrial poor. It has existed for 150 years in an industrial city, which is full of dirt and soot and chimneys pouring out chemicals, and the building outside is very damaged. So we need £3 million to restore it. We have already restored half of the spire, which is very beautiful and tall, and that cost us over £1 million. We need 3 more millions to restore the outside. I have complete confidence in God that we will get it. There are people who have immense generosity out there. And then we will ensure that this building stands for the next 150 years as a place of peace, as a place of spiritual encounter, as a place of calm for everyone. Everyone is welcome here. Our doors are always open. And as a place for encounter between individual human souls and our divine Creator.
Yeah, wonderful. Barry, my husband, who knows you well, he said me that if he would be a betting man, which he is not, but if he would, he would put big money on you to become the next Irish Pope. What do you think of that?
I think this is one of Barry's few mistakes in business and in betting. Yeah. He's a very successful lawyer and businessman. In this case, no. I'm a very happy parish priest. I like being a parish priest. The best job in the Catholic Church is to be a parish priest, because we meet people every day and people are interesting and fascinating and funny. To be a pope, to be a bishop is a very hard job. It means being behind your desk all the time. I would hate that. I like being here, being in my church, being in my city, being in my schools and being with people. So tell Barry to keep his money in his pocket.
I will. Thank you very much for your time, for this opportunity to talk with you, and I wish you the best. Good luck, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Anna, and can I thank all of your viewers. We Irish are always fascinated by Russia in its complexity, in its beauty, the depths of its history, the depths of its suffering historically, which reminds us of our own history. So I am delighted to be part of Anna's broadcast, and I would be delighted to welcome any of you to St. Patrick's in Belfast at any stage. Please come to Ireland to see it. Please come to our city of Belfast to visit its many interesting features.
Дорогие друзья, спасибо вам большое за внимание. Если вам понравилось интервью и вы хотите, чтобы я и дальше продолжала эту деятельность, ставьте лайк и подписывайтесь на мой канал. До новых встреч! С вами была Анна.